You are on assignment.
Now, a behind-the-scenes look. Hello and welcome. I'm Alex Villarreal here with IMRAN SIDDIQUI, and this is On Assignment.
First up, expert insights into the links between Chechen rebels and the Boston Marathon bombings.
Then to Venezuela, Hugo Chávez's successor won the presidential election, but can he save the nation's economy?
Here in Washington, President Obama is facing new controversies, raising questions about his administration.
And a new movie portrays a Muslim immigrant's life turned upside down by 9/11.
On Assignment starts right now.
U.S. federal investigators are still following leads in the Boston Marathon bombings that left 3 dead and hundreds injured back in April.
The suspects, two ethnically Chechen brothers, Tamerlan and Johar Tsarnaev. Since the attack, authorities have questioned other Chechens in the United States who may have had ties to the Tsarnaevs.
VA Russian service reporter and North Caucasus expert FATIMA TLISOVA talked with one former Chechen rebel who says he met with Tamerlan just a month before the attack. She talked with me about her exclusive interview and other insights into the lives of the Tsarnaevs. Let's roll it. Looking at Tamerlan Tsarnaev, who is seen by authorities to have been the mastermind behind these Boston Marathon bombings, does it look to you like someone who was self-radicalized or who was influenced by other possibly rebel elements?
I've studied the history of his family, and I've spoken to almost all the people who knew him in Boston, all the Chechens, and the impression I've got on him was that probably Ruslan Tsarny, his uncle, gave the most accurate description.
The only, I say, what I think what's behind it, being losers, not being able to settle themselves, and thereby just hating everyone who did.
Tamerlan Tsarnaev was a loser, in my opinion, after all these interviews. His American dream was to become a member of the Olympic team for boxing.
Tamerlan Tsarnaev.
He had a criminal record, and that's why he was expelled from the team. And he lost his privilege to become an American citizen. So that was his biggest failure. And after that, he was trying to prove himself in different ways. In my understanding and judging from my experience in dealing with this kind of individuals back in the Caucasus, there was some basics for Tamerlan to become radicalized. But to take this kind of step, he needed to be influenced by somebody. We don't know who that person or those persons were.
If there is indeed a link between the two bombers and militant groups based in the North Caucasus, this would indeed be the first time that we've seen jihadist groups based in that region exporting acts of terrorism to the American soil. That said, at present, there seems to be few indications that these two do indeed have links to an established jihadist organization.
And what about the cultural influence? You've talked about this existence of an alpha male ideal within the Chechen community inside the Caucasus region. Can you talk about that?
That's actually a multi-level issue, because when you look at the whole story of Vladimir Putin coming to power, to Kremlin, it's all about history of power, of martial arts, of alpha male culture. This culture of alpha male was actually taken to the extreme level by Putin's representative in Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov. And Ramzan Kadyrov's lifestyle is mostly about power, about martial arts, about proving himself as the most powerful person in Chechnya and maybe elsewhere in the Caucasus. And if we look back to the time of insurgency, we see some romantic ideas of independence and freedom of Chechnya. Now we see Chechnya more Islamic and more radicalized than ever before. And at some point, actually, Ramzan Kadyrov tried to declare himself as Imam of Chechnya, not the president, not a secular governor of this Russian province, but as the Imam of Chechnya. And in minds of many, many Chechens, Chechnya is the land of Sharia. So it's no longer the land of jihad. They have to go somewhere else. And this culture of alpha male lifestyle is actually influencing many, many younger generations of younger generation Chechens, including those living in the United States or in Europe, because they travel frequently back and forth to Chechnya and to the countries of their asylum, and they pick up all this style. They look up at this style and they wanted to be like them. They want to mirror this style. In their own understanding.
And you did see that with Tamerlan.
Yes, absolutely. He was trying to live a life of a man of success, although he was on the public assistance. Anyway, he was trying to live up to the point where back from Chechnya, people would see him as a very successful, rich alpha male.
VOA Russian service reporter Fatima TLISOVA. Our thanks again to her for her insights into this still developing story.
We're taking a break now. Coming up, Venezuela's economic problems have not been solved with the new president, and they might be worse. You're watching On Assignment. In Venezuela, the law of supply and demand is colliding with the socialist revolution of the late President Hugo Chavez. Since Mr. Chavez's hand-picked successor Nicolas Maduro narrowly won the nation's presidential election in April, high inflation and a shortage of staples are leading many to wonder if the country's economic course is sustainable. And joining me right now is VOA's PADDEN. Thank you so much for joining me. You say in your report that it's even difficult to find a roll of toilet paper. What's going on in Venezuela?
Well, let's go back historically to the late 1990s when Hugo Chavez, the late President Hugo Chavez, was elected. He rode a wave of populism with support from poor and working class people. He embraced a number of socialist economic policies, both to help his core constituency and somewhat to punish his opponents who are the business money interest of the country. He imposed price controls, and he imposed strict regulations on international currency exchange. What happened with this? The price controls brought down the prices, but they also cut production because it was costly to produce because of these very low price controls. And the second thing is with the exchange rates being set at a very low level, it was very hard for people to find dollars or to import imported goods. So what resulted? The whole process has seemed to backfire more so this year than in years past, where you have very high inflation on goods that are not price controlled, and you have shortages of those goods where there are price controls.
And do you think it's getting worse? Because inflation at 30% obviously is not a good sign.
It's hard to say what exactly is the part of the economy that's hurting worse, or what is affecting the economy worse. Is it the inflation? Is it the currency exchange? Is it the shortages? I spoke to a business owner a couple of weeks back when I was in Venezuela, and he was telling me that it was the rigid currency exchange rates that's really killing the economy, more so than the inflation in the other parts, because he is a businessman, he told me, who imports goods from China. He needs dollars to buy those goods. The current currency exchange rate is 6.3 bolivares to $1, but you cannot buy any dollars at that price. On the black market, the price is as high as 20 or 25 for $1. But even that, they're hard to come by. So here's a businessman who's got sufficient local currency, even at the black market rate, to buy these imported goods and cannot get it. And he has customers who are willing to pay these inflated prices, but they cannot get the goods. So this is really stifling the economy.
Okay, and quickly, you've been there on the ground in Venezuela covering the elections. Tell us, do you think Nicolas Maduro's presidency can be in jeopardy?
Yes, it can be in jeopardy. He is in a very shaky position right now. Remember, he won this election to finish out the late Hugo Chávez's term. So the economy is hurting his own constituency as well as the opposition. Things are not looking good for him, and he has pledged to maintain these socialist policies of his predecessor. He's in a bit of a box, and no one knows exactly how he's going to get out of it. They have oil money. Oil money could stabilize things, but the oil money is already dedicated to other programs and other sectors.
Okay. Viewers, Brian and Padden, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Moving on, we're taking a break now. On the other side, the controversies dogging the Obama administration. You're watching On Assignment. US President Barack Obama has found himself on the defensive recently in 3 separate controversies that could affect his agenda in his second term.
There are lingering questions about the killing of the U.S. ambassador and 3 other Americans in Libya, and now the president faces even more scrutiny over the actions of 2 major government agencies. I spoke about this with our national correspondent, Jim Malone. Let's take a look.
A determined President Obama announces the resignation of the acting chief of the Internal Revenue Service.
I just finished speaking with Secretary Liu and senior officials at the Treasury Department.
After revelations that the IRS targeted conservative Tea Party groups.
It's inexcusable, and Americans are right to be angry about it, and I am angry about it. I will not tolerate this kind of behavior in any agency, but especially in the IRS.
Well, of the scandals or controversies facing the Obama administration at the moment, clearly the Internal Revenue scandal is the most serious and could be the most politically damaging. It's already been acknowledged that wrongdoing occurred. They were targeting conservative groups, especially groups with words like Tea Party in them, who were seeking tax-exempt status. The question is now, how far did knowledge of these abuses rise? The president said he found out about it just very recently, but you can expect that we're going to have several congressional committees in both the House and Senate investigating this now for the next few months, trying to find out the extent of the White House awareness of the problem and what, if anything, they wanted to do about it. The IRS thing is potentially very serious, and that's why you saw the president at the very beginning acknowledge that wrongdoing had occurred, but also saying he was not aware of it.
And in your perspective, you've watched a lot of developments like this over the years with a number of different presidents. How do you feel the president's public relations team has handled this issue and the others that the administration is facing?
Well, of course, the worst thing, and we've seen it before for second-term presidents, they have several things hit at once. It's a little unusual, but you have the IRS scandal, you have this issue of the continuing questioning about their handling of the Benghazi attacks last year in Libya, and thirdly, this furor that's erupted over the Justice Department obtaining secretly phone records from the Associated Press as part of a leak investigation. So they're having to do damage control all at once. They've clearly had some problems on the Benghazi story in terms of getting the information out there quickly and sticking to the story. But of course, the IRS, again, is the area where they really want to focus on. They want to make sure that's contained at a lower level to people working just in the IRS. But it has come out that some White House officials were made aware of this. How high that goes, how long they knew about it, this will all come out in the congressional investigations now proceeding. But clearly the IRS scandal is the one they're most concerned about, and I think it's the one they're going to work hardest on in trying to limit the political damage.
And for those viewers that we have outside of the United States, the IRS has long been a very hot button agency for a lot of Americans. Why is that?
Well, it's one of the least popular government agencies because that's who you pay your taxes to. And after all, the American Revolution was founded in part on, taxation without representation. The IRS has long been the butt of comedians' jokes. And during the Watergate scandal of the 1970s that eventually forced Richard Nixon out of office, that was one of the things that he tried to do, going after his political opponents using the tax agency. That was also part of the articles of impeachment that were prepared against Richard Nixon.
And with the IRS issue, what kind of effect might this have on those conservative groups that were shown to be being targeted?
Well, the interesting thing was after he won re-election in 2012, a lot of those conservative groups were kind of demoralized. They were a little bit in decline. Well, and they've been saying for years, by the way, the Obama administration was out to get them. Now they can point to this IRS activity and say, you see, we told you you were right.
And for the president, what does he need to do?
Well, as much as possible, he's being told to try to refocus on his agenda, which includes things like immigration. There are certainly good signs in the U.S. economy improving. He's going to try to highlight that and try to get job growth up again, and try to deal with these scandals as best he can without letting them dominate him. You have to get ahead of these things, and while he's on the defensive, he needs to try to recapture sort of the agenda and the momentum as best he can. But it's going to be a struggle for the next few months.
All right, and again, that was VOA national correspondent Jim Malone. Now, despite these scandals, there has been some recent good news for the Obama administration. The U.S. economy getting a boost from home prices, consumer confidence, and the stock market, all having hit multi-year highs.
Now, moving from Washington to Hollywood, Indian-born filmmaker MIRA NAIR makes movies about ethnic identity, mixed marriages, and tolerance. Her most recent film, The Reluctant Fundamentalist, is based on a novel and deals with the alienation of a young Pakistani in a post-9/11 world. I talked about it with VOA film reporter Penelope POULOU.
The story in itself is very compelling. A young man who comes from Pakistan, very intelligent, gets a top position in Wall Street, gets the world in his feet, lots of money, and then 9/11 happens.
Looks can be deceiving. I am a lover of America, although I was raised to feel very Pakistani.
Changez, a son of an intellectual Pakistani family and a brilliant financial advisor, has everything going for him. A great job on Wall Street, a beautiful American girlfriend, connections. After 9/11, everything changes. He's heckled at the airport, profiled as a potential terrorist.
He's profiled and basically feels marginalized and returns to his country. So that was what grabbed me. But what grabbed me even more is that this film was released a couple of days after the marathon bombings.
And talking to MIRA NAIR, she's come out as an emerging South Asian director on a global level. What was your reaction when you started talking to her?
Oh, she's a very dynamic, very passionate woman. She feels very strongly about global citizenship.
Guys, let's make a movie, yeah.
And she feels that profiling based on your ethnic heritage or your religion should stop, because that is not a way for the world to find peace. We need a better form of global communication in order to seek peaceful solutions.
I kind of connected to your interview with MIRA and to the film as well, because when you say a smart, intelligent Pakistani, that kind of sounds like me. But what I don't agree with in the film is I have never been as a Pakistani, asked to be sidelined or just step aside or anything like that. There's a kind of drama in there which I don't see in real life.
Okay, here is a question that I have for you.
Okay.
Is this your personal experience, or is it an experience that would be a mainstream experience? And that's what you need to find out.
Yeah.
From sources that I have, I know that Homeland Security routinely profiles people based on their ethnic origin and their religion. And maybe sometimes they do it not because they are racist or biased, but because they are grappling with finding a common denominator as to who could be the potential terrorist. And this is exactly where MIRA NAIR's film, strung a chord.
Changez loses his girlfriend, gives up his lucrative job, and returns to his country to teach economics at the University of Lahore. His theories criticizing rampant capitalism and the American dream attract a following, and he becomes a prime suspect in the kidnapping of an American professor.
So often, both sides or any side in our life is presented as reductionist, as good or bad or black or white. But there is a whole level of gray, and gray is also beautiful.
So is this what MIRA NAIR is trying to put out there, that profiling might end in getting the wrong guy?
Yes, absolutely, that's one thing. And another issue that the film is bringing up, which is very significant, is even if you get to develop radical ideas because of your personal experiences, that does not make you a terrorist. And this is something that Elizabeth GOITEIN from the Brennan Center of Justice confirmed.
These personal attributes of a would-be terrorist needs to shift from that to focusing on actual criminal activity.
Why did you want to come to America?
For future reference, Jim, it's Cengiz.
MIRA NAIR hopes her film will help shed some of the misconceptions and promote dialogue in a growing multicultural world.
Talking to MIRA NAIR, did you sense that there's going to be a sequel, or she's going to pursue stories like that which resonate with the people around the world?
She already does. All the stories that the MIRA NAIR has done so far involved multi-racial, multicultural relationships.
Yes, I'm Pakistani. Yes, I'm Muslim. But that's not all I am.
She herself said how much she identifies with her dual nature, that she loves America, but she loves India. And actually, she even loves Uganda, where her family is from. So she says she feels that all these three spots are her home. She's a global citizen.
And MIRA NAIR has quite the repertoire of films. She directed Vanity Fair, a film based on the 19th century book by William Thackeray, and more recently, Amelia, based on the life of Amelia Earhart.
And now to Cairo. Pigs once played an important economic role for the city's Coptic Christians. There was a controversial mass killing of the animal, but now pigs are making a return and helping with the big problem. VOA Cairo correspondent Elizabeth Arrett has a story.
A city of 18 million produces a lot of trash. Much of Cairo's ends up here, in Garbage City, a Coptic Christian enclave where people recycle just about everything. Lately, they're getting help from a secret source. Pigs, the ultimate in organic waste management, are making a small, clandestine comeback. The government ordered all pigs killed in 2009, saying they posed a health hazard, even though World Health officials disagreed. Some pigs escaped the culling. Few Egyptians acknowledge they're here, but those in charge of garbage collecting argue their importance.
Non-human organic waste makes up half of Egypt's garbage, and the pig gets rid of it.
Since the culling, Cairo has become far dirtier, and thousands of pig farmers have lost their jobs. And only a few butchers remain, relying on imports. Christians are free to eat pork, and farmers have built a new slaughterhouse in hope the trade will be revived. But the government has yet to approve it.
There are officials who say, be a little patient. Does that mean the government is objecting? We don't know. We can't understand not having the slaughterhouse, because pigs are here.
Back in Garbage City, Father SAMAAN IBRAHIM thinks he knows why a Christian custom is suppressed in a Muslim-majority land.
They consider pigs unclean, and this is, of course, a form of blind intolerance.
He denies there are pigs in Garbage City, but sees no reason there shouldn't be.
What's wrong with it? It's God's creation. So leave in peace those who work and eat from it.
With little regulation in current chaotic Egypt, the pigs themselves are being left in peace, at least if they stay out of sight. Elizabeth Arrett, VOA News, Cairo.
Well, speaking of staying out of sight, we are about to pull our own disappearing act as well.
But we will be back again next week, and in our next program, we'll talk about the latest developments in Afghanistan.
And you can catch all of our episodes, past and present, at voanews.com, Facebook, and YouTube.
And when you watch on YouTube, you can get accurate English captions straight from our scripts by clicking on CC in the player window.
Signing off from Washington, this has been On Assignment.